So, hello, welcome back to another episode of the Self-Development with Tactics podcast. Today we're once again going through, and it's probably not going to be the last time, we're going through Dr. Nolan Williams' Psychedelics and Neurostimulation for Brain Rewiring on the Huberman Lab podcast number 93. Going to show you the title then as well. Why this is not going to be the last time, since there are many interesting, I'm just, always kind of skipping through the timeline and seeing, what is interesting for me and what might be interesting for other people, like, quote unquote normal people that are not in the scientific space of neuroscience or psychology and whatnot. And quite, and this is something that Andrew does very well, providing certain tools that we all can use, sometimes even tools that we can immediately use, like breathing or breathing methods, so to speak. And there are still a few categories, still a few timeline bits that I find quite interesting and that might be really useful for us all. Before I move on, I'm gonna show you the title and the video and whatever again. So basically to point out the source that I'm using. So here you go, Dr. Nolan Williams, Psychedelics and Neurostimulation for Brain Rewiring, Huberman Lab podcast number 93. So if you want to check out the full one, please do so. I'm probably not gonna, I'm not gonna 100% cover the whole one. So there's still maybe gonna be certain bits that might be interesting specifically for and or to you. I still don't know when this was uploaded, but it was uploaded by Andrew Huberman on his own YouTube channel that does not contain the clips. The clips are on a separate channel, and the clips are pretty cool and also pretty useful, which I've also seen with my shorts. Anyway, I think ketamine might be interesting, but I'm willing to go through the whole childhood bit. I do want to see what Andrew/Nolan are talking about depression and childhood, serotonin and depression, and so on and so forth. Since also Andrew, I think in the episode when he was discussing alcohol, maybe even nicotine, but I think it was about alcohol and the negative effects of alcohol, and by the way, also the positive ones, even though they are quite non-existent. He also covered them. But still, the relation between serotonin and depression. So let's check that out. Let's go to there we go.
Figured out. Along those lines, I want to make sure that before we dive a bit deeper into ketamine and psilocybin, that we do touch on a really important topic that has been in the press a lot lately, which is SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, because we can't really have a discussion about depression without talking about SSRIs. And then I want to circle back to ketamine and psilocybin. It seems that there are now data that essentially state that there's no direct link between serotonin levels and depression, although
as far as I remember, and again, knowledge from Andrew, serotonin is basically being happy with what I already have, and I think also who I am, whereas dopamine is this feeling that I get that I need more of what I'm basically not having or what I just want to have. So a motivation drive, drive to do something, drive to get more, drive to whatever, where serotonin is, just inside. I'm content with what I have, basically.
My understanding is that the SSRIs are powerfully effective for certain forms of obsessive compulsive disorder, and may also be effective for treatment of depression, but it may again be through some effect unrelated to serotonin itself. Is that right? And how should we think about SSRIs? Are they useful? Are they not useful? What's going on with SSRIs in your patients and in other people as well?
Yeah, so the experiment that I described a bit ago around the naltrexone and ketamine is the first time I'm aware of where we were able to essentially eliminate an antidepressant's effect by using a second drug as kind of a blockade and it highlights a bigger issue, right? The issue that we haven't had a good way of really understanding how these drugs work. And so it's the difference. I think a lot of the controversy there is that it's been difficult, I think, for folks to see that something can, on one hand, work, and on the other hand, we don't know how it works, right? And so SSRIs clearly work. Many meta-analyses kind of proving that out, right? That in a subpopulation of individuals, they achieve great benefit from depression, for depression, for obsessive compulsive disorder, for generalized anxiety disorder, panic, all these things. You can see an improvement in those symptoms with what we call SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. The issue there is that these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors end up blocking the reuptake of serotonin and leaving the serotonin, in this kind of in between two neurons for a while, and allowing for more serotonin to kind of be there. The issue is that they don't work immediately, right? So they don't work like the same day you start taking them, and that suggests that probably it's not exactly the serotonin being in there that's directly driving it, that it's much more likely that it may have some, say, brain plasticity effects, right? We know that things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor get upregulated with chronic oral antidepressant use. And so that's kind of the idea, is that these things work, but what's powerful, and I think what the authors of this paper, was extremely controversial paper, were in part trying to say was that there's not a deficit of serotonin. You're not born with what people call a chemical imbalance. And psychiatry has known this. This is not actually new information to anybody. It's kind of a rehashing of a bunch of information we've known for a while now, but in the lay press, it's kind of hit in a way that it didn't seem to grab attention before with previous publications. But this idea that this chemical imbalance idea is wrong. I really think that part's important, because I think that for a while, I think psychiatry, what I'll call Psychiatry 1.0, right? This kind of idea of Freud and psychotherapy and its origins. It was a lot around, your family and those experiences, and psychotherapy kind of going in and correcting or helping you to figure out, or show you being able to see, or people hear you, so that you can eventually come to the conclusion of certain cognitions that aren't helping you, right?
And this is something that kind of struck me the last time, so yesterday, and this episode is up, so if you want to check it out. And it was kind of basically about what a psychiatrist or a psychotherapy, what is the noun of therapy? The person that does therapy. So the MD or psychiatrist or whatever. What they're trying to do is, and this was also like the whole rule thing from last episode. I, in my head, or people that are depressed, are having certain rules in their head, certain assumptions in their head that are not true. But the thing is, I guess, as far as I can think of it, either they're not seeing it, or there's just no good replacement for that. When I think, and I totally believe in it, that I am, a bad person because of this, that, and the other thing, it is quite difficult to replace that and then think like, oh, okay, right, I could also think about this in this, that, and the other way. You should actually check it out, because I cannot paraphrase it as good as they explained it or they were talking about it. But it is quite interesting, and it is just sensical, and it just makes sense that, okay, the therapist is just the therapist, right? Is just trying to show you that that you can think about it. Reframing might not be exact reframing might not be what I'm referring to, but the therapist is just trying to show you that maybe these certain ways of thinking they are not serving you in any way, and maybe also questioning them. I mean, when I think, okay, I am bad because of this, that, and the other thing, why do I think that I'm bad because of this, that, and the other thing? Is this really the truth? Have I done other things that kind of, go against this whole opinion that I'm having about myself, that I am bad? Because apparently our brain is going to certain assumptions, going into a certain direction really fast. And we can't do that much about this. And this was also kind of about the experiment with, I'm having a word which says a certain color, for example, red, but this word is written in green. And so saying green, but reading red is like just, kind of this mechanism apparently, as far as I've understood it the last time. And which apparently, and which is interesting, and apparently this is the case that you are assuming things too fast or something. I don't know, you should actually really check it out. But it, in theory, and when one is thinking about it, it makes sense, and it's quite simple, but yet very difficult.
And there's a huge importance there, but there's a history where, things like the schizophrenic mother and all of that, that was a concept at some point, right? And so we've transitioned from that to the, for a long time, the chemical imbalance, which I'll call Psychiatry 2.0, this idea that there's something chemically missing. And I think that the trouble there for a patient who's not a physician, who's not someone who's steeped in these sorts of ideas, who's more of kind of a person, a kind of average American out there, right? Is that it's sending a message of there's something missing with me, whether it be my experiences I had no control over when I was a child, or a chemical in my brain. What I think is really powerful with TMS, really powerful with TMS, and a level even powerful with the psychedelic story, is it's saying something different. TMS works and there's no serotonin coming in or out of the brain, right? And we're doing a rapid form of TMS that works in 1 to 5 days. So it's very unlikely that there's some long-term kind of upregulation of serotonin that's driving that. So our work actually kind of pushes back on this serotonin hypothesis as being kind of the center of depression, because it says, look, we're not giving anybody any serotonin. We're simply turning these brain regions on, and we're focused on the circuitry. And that's Psychiatry 3.0. It's not just like neuromodulation. Neuromodulation is a really nice, use case for Psychiatry 3.0 because it's a way to focally and directly perturb brain regions in whatever modality you're using. But there are a lot of groups that are actually doing neuroimaging before and after, and they're able to see circuit level changes for something like psilocybin or ketamine long after the drug is gone, right? Suggesting in those same brain regions converge. So the subgenual default mode network connection that we see is changing with our Stanford neuromodulation therapy technique. It's that same set of brain regions that ketamine and psilocybin seem to act on these connections between brain networks that seem to shift. And so it refocuses the story on something that's highly correctable. And it's basically electrophysiology, and it's basically kind of recalibrating a circuit that is recalibratable, instead of I have something missing, or I have some set of experiences early in life that are going to forever trap me in these psychiatric diagnoses. And so it kind of challenges that idea. And I think that's what's so powerful about Psychiatry 3.0, this idea of focusing on the circuit, because it gets us into thinking about psychiatry and psychiatric illnesses as something that are recoverable. People can get better. People, we've seen with our TMS techniques, we've seen it with some of the psychedelic work that we've done, where people are actually in normal levels of mood for sustained periods of time, or
within 5 days.
Within 5 or less days. And in the case of of the psychedelics within a few days, right? So we can get people out of these states. They're totally well. There's no drug in their system at that point. In the case of the psychedelics, there was never a drug in their system in the case of TMS. And it just tells us that it's fixable. It's just like the heart. It's just like, it's just like an arrhythmia in the heart. It's just like, these other illnesses that it's like a broken leg. We can go in and do something and we can get somebody better. And I think what's empowering and what a lot of patients have told me is they say, I've gotten to, some people will relapse and need more stimulation or need more psychedelics or whatever it is, but they'll tell me, I've relapsed and I'm depressed again, but I'll never think about killing myself again because I know that if I go get stimulated again, it improves, it gets better, I will be able to re-achieve it, and I can't, and I don't fear that I'm chronically broken. I don't fear that the chemical imbalance is still imbalanced. I don't fear that these things that I couldn't control in my childhood, are going to be there and drive this problem forever. And I think that's what's so powerful about this.
The sense of control.
The sense of control. The sense of they're not doing the stimulation themselves. They're not administering the drug in these trials themselves. They probably never will. These will probably be medical treatments, but they are choosing to do it. And in that sense, they are in control.
I think, first of all, that this underlying feeling of secureness that I'm seeing there or that I'm recognizing there, for me, just really makes sense, that one is feeling good about this treatment because I would assume that there are just not too many drawbacks. I mean, when we're thinking about ketamine, when we're thinking about psilocybin, I don't know the small details, but I would believe that there are certain drawbacks, health-wise or whatever. I think there was something about the heart and ketamine and or blood pressure. Is it blood pressure? I think you know what I mean. So there are certain, I guess, quite every time when we are taking something that is not being produced by the body, well, this is definitely overgeneralized, but I would assume that there are going to be certain drawbacks and or maybe certain issues that people are facing or having to face. Whereas when it is just stimulation, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can overdo this. I wouldn't know, but I think this is really, really, really amazing. And I don't know what the interface looks like. I don't know what the machinery looks like. But I mean, when you can produce or make this machine, then you can provide it to quite many people, I would assume. Which, I mean, of course, and this is from Tim Ferriss' episode with, I do not really remember, I think it was also a psychiatrist around ketamine, also quite interesting, where they were talking about the fact that most often those treatments are being done in groups. You're just, having many people there, and it makes sense, because it is very efficient. So I don't know what it looks like with this form of therapy. And, besides that, I think it was today, I thought like the whole thing about childhood, and I think it really does make a difference. And, I mean, there are going to be certain traumatic experiences that maybe we all have had. Maybe being born might also be a traumatic experience itself. But is it actually only about this? As back in the days, is it really only about my mother and whatever? I still think knowing about it might be useful. Maybe also to just, get to know and understand where we are at now. I think just, knowing history kind of sometimes at least makes it quite clear or at least more understandable, more logical. But it's great to see a different approach. I think it is always great to see a different approach also with psilocybin / ketamine / drugs in general, using them for a very, very, very good reason and a very good thing. Actually leveraging what we're having, but for some reason we have been I don't want to say we have not been considering it, but through laws or because of laws, we were not quite able, which actually kind of does not make too much sense. I mean, well-being, I would assume well-being and the well-being of the people is in everyone's government or in every government core, isn't it? But yeah, let's see. The next one is going to be about memories and rule creation.
Yeah, I have a good friend, I won't out him for reasons that'll become clear in a moment, who was quite obese and lost a lot of weight and was really proud of himself. And then I guess we could say he sort of relapsed in a sense, not all the way, but far along. But his tone around it was very different. He knew he had accomplished what his goal once before. He was disappointed in himself, but he knew exactly why he had relapsed. It was very clear. He had essentially relapsed to the previous set of eating behaviors and lack of exercise behaviors, and has now brought himself back again. And it just resonates with your story that, once somebody understands they can do it because they've been there before, this idea again of considering new rules that there's, and that brings me to this question about psychedelics and frankly the altered thinking and perception that occurs in high dose psilocybin clinical sessions. It seems that the disordered thinking, even though it could be random, right? Hearing colors and seeing sounds is always the kind of cliche statement of the Timothy Leary era. Yeah. Also, right there, that's a Stroop task of sorts. It's a synesthesia. It's a combining of perceptions, but it's sort of Stroop task-ish in that it's a new set of rules for the same stuff. Yeah. Right. And many people do report improvements in trauma-related symptomology and depression, as I understand it, from my read of the clinical trials after taking psilocybin, because during those sessions, something comes to mind spontaneously. As you and I were talking about earlier, they will report, for instance, a new way of seeing the old problem. That's right. And the old problem could be the voice that they're no good, nothing will ever work out, or could be even more subtle than that. So that raises two questions. One is about the basic functioning of the human brain, which is, why do you think the brain would ever hold on to rules that don't serve us well? That's one question. Yeah, and then the second question is, what is it about psilocybin and related molecules in terms of their neurochemistry, in terms of the ways they disrupt thinking and feeling, et cetera, during the session, that allow this novel rule consideration phenomenon? Yeah.
For quite some time, I think it was like 5 days or something, I have been experimenting with self-hypnosis. And at this point, by the way, the Reverie app that is made by David Spiegel and team, so David Spiegel also being at Stanford, I think maybe even professor and whatnot, but he definitely has his lab there and whatever. Don't know the little details, but I've been experimenting with self-hypnosis, mainly with scripts by Mike Seeley, S-E-A-L, I think E-Y or something, who was how do you say it? I mean, Andrew also talked about him and his scripts, and so I thought, well, I'll give it a try because of the benefits of hypnosis and or NSDR, non-sleep deep rest, for learning, because at the time I was studying for an exam that actually went pretty well. Looking forward to, 6 weeks when I fucking get my result. But what was quite interesting to me was that I came to certain ideas. I have, also kind of seen certain things that I haven't thought about before, and I haven't kind of seen before because I didn't thought about it before. I mean, just visualizing it in my head, and it was quite interesting. And this kind of reminded me of Andrew saying, well, those people just gets to certain ideas, they get to certain thoughts they have never had before. And I found that pretty interesting. It's very actually surrealistic when we're thinking about surrealism and surrealistic art and the methods they have been using, and basically getting ideas in certain ways, not only through drugs, but also in other ways. And I found it pretty interesting. Unfortunately, I have kind of dropped this habit again, but really interesting and also suggestible, not only when you're learning, but just in general.
So the first question, I think it's an evolutionary neurobiology answer, right? I think that at the individual person level, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that when we're really stressed out, some of us want to eat more, right? At the individual person level, because it's like, that's not particularly that good for my health in the long term. But if you think about it like, in some 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, if I'm highly stressed out, it's most likely that I'm about to not have food at some point, and I should eat a bunch of food that is high fat, high sugar, high carb food to put on weight for that, next phase where in this stress I may be in battle and I don't have food and I have enough fuel on board, right? And so we end up being a result of probably a lot of biology that's not that useful in the modern era. And I think in the brain for say, let's say PTSD, right? A lot of veterans come back and they experience these PTSD symptoms, and they're not at all useful back home, right? They hear some loud noise and all of a sudden they're behind a car, or they're behind a, I've heard of folks jump and run behind a trash can or whatever in the middle of San Francisco when they hear a loud noise. But if you put them back in the battlefield,
highly adaptive.
That's highly adaptive, right? And so I think what's interesting is that we, in the absence of using substances like psychedelics, end up having these very persistent memories that are attached to negatively valenced emotion predominantly. As you were saying earlier, the jacket in elementary school, I had various things like that for me too, right? You remember these things. And we hold on to those things from, I think, an evolutionary neurobiology standpoint. But what seems to, for whatever reason, kind of alleviate that are these substances, some new like MDMA, some that have been around for thousands of years like psilocybin and used in kind of sacramental as a sacrament in traditions, seem to have a therapeutic effect that seems to be pretty long lasting for these phenomenon. And so it's just curious, right? It's curious that in the absence of that, these things will keep going on, but in the presence of that exposure, then all of a sudden you see a resolution of the problem. And we have some work now, we're treating folks with Navy SEALs, and the data's still being analyzed, but the anecdotes that we're getting, right, are folks are coming back and they're saying, it's finally gone, right? These set of PTSD symptoms are finally gone. And so this idea that for whatever reason, going into what's probably a highly plastic state, like we were talking about earlier, upregulation of brain-derived neurotrophic factor in the case of ibogaine, glial-derived neurotrophic factor, this highly plastic state, and the ability to re-experience memories. And then, as we always reconsolidate a memory when we bring it back up. We always reconsolidate, but reconsolidating it in that state, for whatever reason, may drive a therapeutic effect. The jury's still out. I would say that I'm an agnostic to what tool I'm using kind of guy. Like my business is to find treatments that help people, and so I'm much more like pragmatic about it. If this sort of thing, which has a lot of cultural baggage, but if this sort of thing ultimately ends up being therapeutic, if we can design trials that convince me and others that it is, then we should absolutely use it. And if it doesn't, then we clearly shouldn't use it, right? And I think that's a big that's a big question the field's going to have to work out. We have a hard time blinding these trials because the placebo condition is not easy to pull off, obviously.
Right. A placebo for a psilocybin journey is hard to imagine.
We've been thinking about this, and maybe that ketamine study that I was talking about earlier, if we could give people naltrexone and ketamine, maybe that's a good sort of placebo condition, right? Because we know that we can block any of the actual antidepressant effects of ketamine. They can still have an experience, And so that's one way of doing it. But thinking about ways to do that and really kind of proving this out, and that's been, I think that's been kind of central to the way I've been thinking about this. But yeah, I think there's the work that's been done so far, the first psilocybin trial, the first.
Unfortunately, or hopefully, unfortunately, there are certain more trials going on, and there are going to be certain more trials and or experiments and or whatever. Some people, for example, Tim Ferriss indeed does, with I think actually quite a lot of money, support those trials and those endeavors. And I'm looking forward to that. I really am. And as he said as well, when data is convincing enough that people can use it, that therapists can use it, of course, maybe those people or some people would have to, have to, do some lectures as well to actually know how to use it without anybody else and whatever. So having more knowledge, learn something new and then whatever. But I think this is great. I really do think that this is a great step into the right direction. Well, actually, as I said before, and as I was thinking about it, yes, we have not been using those ways of treating certain things, certain conditions, just because of laws, just because for the general public it should not be used. But it is actually quite interesting. I mean, I don't know. Can I buy morphium? I don't know. I kind of think I can't. Maybe I can in the pharmacy. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to also knowing more about that. But with that being said, I'm probably going to end the episode there. I think it's actually quite long already. And I'm hopefully going to see you the next time. So I wish you the best. Bye-bye. And now we have to wait for a bit so that this little tiny outro is also in the episode.